The honourable member from Thornhill.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP costly coalition, grocery prices are up 27%. Gas prices are up 40%, and now new data from Equifax shows that credit card debt is up too. The average Canadian now has $4,300 on their credit card, the highest on record since the last recession. Why are these Liberals using their carbon tax to inflate the price of everything, punishing families and forcing them to take on more debt just to get by?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am really glad to have the chance to talk about our carbon rebates and our policies on credit cards, because today we announced that later this month, thanks to our government's negotiations with credit card companies, the fees that small businesses have to pay are going down. That is good news for small businesses across the country. And you know what else is good news? Small businesses are going to get big carbon rebates. That member of Parliament, like me as an Ontario MP, an Ontario business with 10 employees is going to be getting $4,000.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Speaker, this might be the only person left in the world that thinks paying more tax makes you richer and somehow stops climate change. The carbon tax isn't about the environment, and it's certainly not about affordability. It's about getting more money for her spending addiction. Even Catherine McKenna admits that their plan was always to spend your money. It's clear that they've run out of money. They're going to raise the tax over and over again to 61 cents a litre as 2 million people use a food bank. How many more people will face poverty before they reverse course?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will give them a number: 69 million cars in avoided pollution. That's our number, Mr. Speaker. That's my number. That's our number on this side of the House. If we listened to them, we would do nothing to fight climate change. Pollution would be even worse. Emissions would be 41% higher than what we've been doing. We're working to fight climate change. We're working to support Canadians to create the economy of the 21st century. They have nothing to offer, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
The NDP Liberals are desperately trying to convince Canadians that they're better off paying a higher and higher carbon tax. But the truth hurts. It appears that food inflation isn't a global issue, it's an NDP Liberal issue. Right. According to the food professor, because of the carbon tax, wholesale food prices in Canada are up 34% in every single category. And wholesale food prices in Canada are 37% higher than they are in the United States. Again, because of the carbon tax. Exactly. Will the Prime Minister just admit he was wrong about his carbon tax and call a carbon tax election?
Let's go.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that Conservatives are now starting to listen to economists, and they quoted Trevor Toombs. Well, let's say what Trevor Toombs has to say about carbon pricing and price on food, Mr. Speaker. And I quote, "While concern around affordability is clearly warranted, climate policies are not a significant driver of the rising cost of living, nor will removing policies such as carbon pricing materially improve the situation." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable from Foothills.
The NDP Liberals just can't handle the truth. And the truth is Canadians are being forced to food banks in record numbers. And even the Liberal member from Winnipeg North said when you attribute the increase in food prices of 34% to the carbon tax, that's absurd. But the food professor's own data shows the Liberals are wrong. Right. What is absurd is increasing the carbon tax when 9 million Canadians don't know when their next meal is coming from. Exactly. Will the Prime Minister admit their tax plan is this carbon tax, call a carbon tax election so Canadians could put food on the table?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And being a farmer myself, I know what it's like for farmers to be on the front line of climate change. Our farmers face devastating storms like Hurricane Fiona, which tore down barns, killed cattle, We have floods, fires right across the country. This is the reason, one of the reasons why food prices are so high. We put a price in pollution that works, Mr. Speaker. And also, my honourable colleague, in his writing, his average farmer will receive $1,800 a year in carbon rebate. I know the Conservative Party
Member from Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. This government is forcing families to pay more for gas, for groceries, for home heating, at a time when they can least afford it. Now the province of New Brunswick is taking the Liberals to court to hold them accountable for the money their carbon tax is making off the backs of everyday Canadians. Will this government listen to Canadians, scrap their carbon tax, or will they finally let Canadians choose in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the member opposite can remind the Premier of New Brunswick and some of his members of his own bench that they asked Premier Higgs to go with the federal system because people get more money back, and that's exactly what the Premier did. The Premier of New Brunswick decided to go for the federal system because more people in New Brunswick get more money back than what they pay in carbon pricing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, we know the Liberals would rather talk about anything else than talk about the fact that their 61-cent per litre carbon tax will mean that Canadians will have amongst the highest fuel prices in the world. Even the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed that the Liberals' carbon tax costs Canadians more than they get back. Canadians have no confidence in this Prime Minister or in his costly carbon tax. When will the Liberal government get out of the way that so Conservatives can finally axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very clear that the vast majority of Canadian families get more money back than they pay. That has been validated by 300 economists, very much including Trevor Toombs, who they like to quote these days as an economist of record. But I would say not having a climate plan and not having an economic plan for the future will have dire implications for the people who live in Atlantic Canada. These folks oppose the Atlantic Accords, the work that's being done to actually launch an offshore wind and a hydrogen industry to ensure that we are creating good jobs and economic opportunities in Atlantic Canada. They have no plan for climate. They have no plan for the economy.
The Honourable Member from New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes up, costs up, crime's up, and time's up for this costly coalition's carbon tax scam. 9 premiers are now against the Liberal carbon tax. Today in New Brunswick, Premier Blaine Higgs is challenging this scam in court. Provinces don't get a rebate for heating schools and fueling ambulances. Carbon taxes are not revenue neutral when provinces and municipalities end up paying more for essential services. When will the Green, Liberal, NDP coalition axe the tax or keep making health care and education more expensive?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps the member opposite doesn't remember that he himself asked Premier Higgs to go with the federal system so that more people in New Brunswick would get more money back than what they pay in carbon pricing. Perhaps he forgot that he made himself that request to his Premier, Mr. Speaker.
Wow. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi. Mr. Speaker, forestry workers in Quebec in some 30 communities are being affected. It is a catastrophe. Out of 1,400 jobs, at least, are being affected and is affecting Quebec's economy. The Bloc has once again voted to keep the government in place, and this is how we realize that they're disconnected from the reality of our regions. Is the Bloc aware of the extent of the disaster that the minister's decree has had in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my colleague that we put $500 million of potential investment on the table in Quebec and the regions and the forestry workers and for workers in that sector. And we're only waiting for the Quebec government to sit down at the table with us to discuss things. We want to find a solution, but the Conservatives don't want to do anything for the economy or jobs. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec Minister of the Environment is in Ottawa today, and he doesn't understand anything, as do all Quebecers, because our workers are now out of jobs. He wants Quebec to be able to take action in its jurisdiction. The Bloc says it defends Quebec's jurisdiction, but it's very visible on this file. Can the government finally understand that this decree is a catastrophe we could have foreseen? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind once again my colleague that at the end of 2022, we signed a joint letter with the federal government, well, between the federal government and the Quebec government, asking Quebec to present a plan for the reestablishment of the woodland caribou. But now it's 2024 and we're still waiting for this plan. All we're asking is for Quebec to do what it committed to do, and we're ready to work with them to find solutions. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, like the Prime Minister, the Bloc leader likes to entertain us with imaginary tales to try to justify his relevance in Ottawa. He sells himself as the hero who puts the brakes on the moratorium on logging in Abitibi, Côte-Nord, and Lac-Saint-Jean regions. But the reality is that Quebec's Minister of the Environment, Benoit Charette, is that the Liberal Prime Minister and his Minister of the Environment literally want to shut down this economic engine of Quebec's regions without even visiting them. Once again, will Canada's Environment Minister put a definitive stop to this radical decree? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, experts, ecologists, forestry workers, and First Nations all say that the future of the forestry industry in Quebec and in our country depends on the health of our forests and also on the health of the caribou. You can't have one without the other. The only people who don't understand that here is the Conservative Party.